everybody, today we're going to cover lesson 2.5, the Revolutionary War. And our objective for today is to describe the major battles of the Revolutionary War and how they led to our independence. So we're not going to get into every single battle of the Revolutionary War. We're going to talk about the start of the war, the turning point for the war, and then what finally ended the war. So the first battle of the Revolutionary War was known as the Shot Heard Around the World. And that first battle, let me make it darker for everybody, of the Revolutionary War was the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And here we have a painting of that first battle of Lexington and Concord. And one of the more famous quotes that you've probably heard about this was Paul Revere, who was known for traveling through the night yelling, "The British are coming. The British are coming, the British are coming." He rode through the night to warn the others. And this is essentially what really began the Revolutionary War. So after the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, there was an attempt to try to stop the war through what we call the Olive Branch Petition. And this was an attempt by the colonists to reach a peace agreement with Great Britain. However, the king never even read it and said the colonists were rebelling. So we ended up going to war. Well, that you can't see. Let's change the color of this, you guys. My fault. Okay, so there you go. Should be able to see that better. Attempt by the colonists to reach a peace agreement with Great Britain. However, the king never even read it. He said that the colonists were just rebelling, and there was no point to reading this document, and disregarded it, even though it was an effort by the colonists to try to make peace. So here we have a painting or a recreation of the Battle of Saratoga. And the Battle of Saratoga was known as the turning point in the war. So before this, let me change the color again. So before the Battle of Saratoga, the colonists had been losing. And they had been losing pretty badly. They really didn't think there was a whole lot of hope. They didn't really have any money or very many resources. States were kind of fighting independently. There really was very little united front to fight against the British. And so it wasn't until the Battle of Saratoga that it was a turning point in the war. And there was all of a sudden this belief that the colonists could possibly win this. And so why this was so important, and the most important result of this, is that it led the French to support the colonists. So this was huge. The French set in their navy, which was it was a very strong, great navy at the time, but also resources and money that we just didn't have as colonists. And so because of the French support during the Revolutionary War, the colonists were able to unite and eventually end up winning the war. James Armstead was an enslaved man from Virginia who worked under Marquis de Lafayette. And Lafayette was a Frenchman who was living in the colonies at the time and very much supported the colonists' fight for independence. And during the Revolutionary War, enslaved individuals could work for the British Army. And the British Army recruited them by saying, if you come and fight for us, then you can receive your freedom at the end of the war. So Marquis de Lafayette and James Armstead had him working with the British Army. He actually worked as an apprentice for a tailor. So he helped essentially make the clothes for the British officers. And so he would listen to what the British officers would say and then report back to Lafayette, who would then report that information back to George Washington. And because of the information and Lafayette uncovered, they managed to win the war. So it was a combination of France supporting us having a good understanding of what the British Army was going to do, and we understood what the British Army was going to do because of men like James Armstead, who were spies and reported back to essentially the colonists what was happening, and therefore led to helped us or helped the colonies lead to winning the war. So the war finally came to an end with the Battle of Yorktown on October 19th of 1971. British forces were surrounded by the French and colonial and French troops. So what you can see here, and I know that this picture isn't very good, but you can see here we have the British right there in red on the corners of Yorktown. And then you can see over to the left of that, you have the colonists. And then you also, in addition to that, have the French army and the French Navy. And so the British were completely surrounded by either the French or the colonists, and therefore ended up surrendering. And when they ended up surrendering, it was called the Treaty of Paris of 1783 was what ended up ending the war, the Revolutionary War. And there was a drinking song that they actually used to sing called The World Turned Upside Down. So if any of you have ever watched the movie Hamilton, which I highly recommend, you may have heard them sing that, or you can even go on YouTube and type in "The World Turned Upside Down" and you can hear them sing it. And that was a drinking sound because nobody believed that the colonists could actually win this war. Now, why did they end up winning the war? Well, we already talked about what happened on the United States side, but let's talk about what was going on in Britain. During the time period. In Great Britain, the people had or showed very little support for this war. They did not understand why we were fighting it, or they did not understand why Great Britain was fighting against the colonies. They just wanted to let it go. So, in addition to the United States or to French supporting the colonists and to spies and the information they gained, it also just had very little support at home. The people of Great Britain, the British, did not want to fight this war. They didn't want to pay for this war. So they didn't really have a lot of support, which also led to the ending of this war. So, to put it in summary, there were three major events during the Revolutionary War that you need to be aware of. The first was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and that was what started the shots heard around the world with Paul Revere yelling, "The British are coming" through the night. The second is going to be the Battle of Saratoga. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point where the French finally became involved in the war. Thanks to help from enslaved African Americans acting as spies, giving us information on the British plans, we were able to defeat the British at the Battle of Yorktown, which led to the Treaty of Paris in 1783.